So a tale of two templates, taking your Drupal theming from 7 to 8. I'll warn you guys right now, this is a presentation really sort of about saying, assuming you have done Drupal theming in Drupal 7, how do you take those skills and apply them to 8? So if you've set up themes in 7 and you're trying to figure out kind of how to get started, this is the talk to kind of cover what the mapping is from how you would have done things before to how you would do things now. So if you've already done a project in Drupal 8, I won't be offended at all if you just get up and walk out right now, because we're not going to get into anything super clever. I've got a couple of examples mixed in, and I can show you some code and some stuff, but it's mostly that's really sort of the focus. So hey everybody, I'm Howard. I'm Tizzo. You might know me better that way from the internet, Drupal.org and wherever else. I'm sort of more of a DevOps guy than a front-end guy, but I'm giving a theming session. And just stick with me, guys, and I promise we'll get through this. Oh, and apparently I had that build out again. Sorry. So I like to sort of be a full stack developer. I think knowing the whole chain makes all of us better. And so I really like to always try to stay up on things and push myself to step outside my comfort zone and learn other things. I also find that giving a talk on something that isn't what I do all day, every day, helps me come to some of these topics with a different perspective where I can kind of figure out where new people will get stuck, because I've kind of gone through the thing recently as well, where when I talk about stuff that I've been doing for years, I get lost and kind of have trouble figuring out what people would see and not know. So I work at Zivtech. We are a Philly Drupal shop. We do consulting on and building custom web applications primarily, mostly using Drupal, although we also have done some Symfony apps and a whole ton of Node.js, especially recently. And I'm also the CTO of Probo, which is a continuous integration service and quality assurance tool. So what this lets you do is essentially every time somebody makes a pull request, spin up a copy of the site in its own little sandbox where you can go surf around, actually use the Drupal site with a real database and see real content, so that there's a place for you to share your work while it's in progress. So that way you don't have to have the whole team pushing to one dev environment, breaking each other's stuff, and then asking the clients to give feedback, and maybe the client comes in and says, the news section's great, the blog section's great, the front page is terrible, can you launch just the news section and the blog section? And you're left saying oh dear, I guess we are going to have to do some Git surgery and hate our lives for a while and figure out where to push the other changes. This allows you to keep everybody's changes isolated until they get reviewed and everyone's happy with it. Then you click that merge button and you can pretty much always be going to production. We find this is really helpful with our Drupal 8 and front-end stuff kind of especially, which is why I wanted to mention it to you guys since you're interested in doing Drupal 8 builds. And Probo is a really great tool for especially big teams that are moving quickly, but we even use it on our small projects with just 1 or 2 people. So, get started. Boom. In this presentation, I'm going to walk you guys through this example theme called the Boom theme. I did push it up to GitHub, so you can find it at github.com/tizzo/boom. There's a 7.x and 8.x branch. And it's a really simple, here's the minimal thing you can do to get a theme bootstrapping and seeing how you override templates, how you define new variables, how you print those variables, how you do all the stuff you do as a themer. So it's sort of strip away all the extraneous stuff. This is just sort of your bare bones, how to get things rocking and rolling. So let's start there, setting up our theme. Again, if you were, wow, that's pretty washed out. What's that?
Lights go down a little bit.
Do they? Is that a thing we can do?
Change from overhead to projection with note taking. A little bit darker, but. Oh, yeah.
That's a little better.
You or me, but too dark.
That's try too dark. Let's do projection note taking. Oh, there.
So we use a dark theme.
You gotta turn on.
Most of my slides have higher contrast than this one. For the most part, I'll go quickly through this part. For the most part, things look pretty much the same. Instead of going and putting our theme in sites, all themes, you might even have a contrib folder here, boom. It's just up at the top level in Drupal so that we stop yelling at people for putting their theme right into the theme folder they see when they open up their Drupal directory. If you just follow your heart, it'll now take you to the right place. Now, the one difference here that I want to point out that's really notable is template.php has been replaced with your theme name.theme, which is, if you think about it, way more intuitive because template.php is in no way a template. It's like the only thing in your theme directory that's not a template and the only thing called template. So we can all agree this is better. Another change, we're now using YAML for all configuration file in Drupal. So the genesis of the Drupal info file from Drupal 7 and before is somebody was kind of trying to mimic ini files, and we used some upstream project for parsing them, and there was a security vulnerability, so we said, well, we better invent our own format and maintain it forever, which seemed like a good idea at the time, but now we've come to our senses and realized let's just use a thing that our IDEs and editors understand called YAML. We'll use it for everything. It works really well with Symfony, which is sort of the core of what Drupal 8's built on top of, which we'll talk more about the theming aspects of that in a minute. So for the most part, it's a straight port. Name, type, description, package, core. If you just replace your equal signs with colons, it's pretty much the same. Regions, you can see that's structured slightly differently in the syntax, but not really conceptually. Because this is sort of the syntax for saying we'll have a region array with one element in it called header with the human readable label, and that's pretty much the same thing we've got here. I probably should have capitalized header. The one gotcha is right there. So if you just kind of went, oh, wow, this format looks the same, I'll copy it, I'll replace my equal signs, you would find that the theme shows up but says that it doesn't work with core and can't be installed. Watch out for that. You need to tell it type is theme as opposed to module. The other notable difference is you can see here that we have replaced style sheets all in print with libraries. Now this could be a little bit tricky. You know, I should probably have asked this at the beginning. Who here has built a Drupal 7 theme before? Who here has built a Drupal 8 theme before? Y'all have heard my warning, but just thought I was that charming, huh? Cool, and who here has worked with Drupal's library system before? Okay, that's about what I expected. So, Drupal 7 had brought in this idea of a library, and the idea was, rather than just sort of having every module be responsible for knowing what every JavaScript or CSS file it might want, and what other JavaScript files it needed, Drupal 7 brought in this idea of libraries where you could say, I've got jQuery UI, jQuery UI requires jQuery, or I've got some extension to jQuery UI, and that means that I need to pull in jQuery UI, whatever, drag and drop. Drupal 8 takes that a step farther and says, let's make definition of libraries easier, and then let's just say everything has to use that system so that it's all going through one unified way of doing things as opposed to having them kind of sprinkled to the wind. Here, this is one extra step here, but you'll see it saves us 2 steps elsewhere. We don't just say we have CSS/styles.css for all and CSS/print.css for print. We just say we've got this thing called global styles. And then we define the library to say that metadata stuff. So in Drupal 7, you could have done this in template.php. You could have defined a library called boom global styles. You'd have to, you'd be encouraged to namespace it so that you're not stepping on anybody else's toes. That can happen kind of automatically for us in V8. And you could say CSS styles.css and media is screen, and then we'd have this thing that could be reused elsewhere. Although this particular example where I'm adding my global styles as a library is a little silly, because anytime my theme was turned on, it'd be added by that info file. But I wanted to show you how you define libraries before. In 8, again, syntax is pretty much the same, just replace it with YAML, and we can define it here, and then any library added to the libraries list in the info.yaml file gets added on every single page. So you define it in the libraries file, and then it'll just be everywhere. So then you need to go about attaching libraries, right? So in Drupal 7, you could write boom preprocess node, and this is also how you could add an individual variable to be printed out in your template. We'll talk more about that later. And then you could call Drupal add CSS. Actually, that's not adding the library, that's just including the CSS file directly. Right, this is attaching a specific CSS file to a specific page. That should have been a call to library, I'm sorry. And then here, this is adding another individual to make this example make a little more sense. Since this one's not global, if we had something that we wanted to add on nodes, we could define boom node, define our CSS file, and then in preprocess node, we can call attached library and tell it what libraries we want to pull in, and then that'll automatically be included. But there's another way to do it. If you don't want to go write in PHP code because you're a front-end person and you rightly feel like you shouldn't need to do that all the darn time, you can just call this new function called attached library right from a template, and it'll get included and aggregated and all the right stuff that should happen with your CSS and JavaScript. Throw it right in line, and don't even worry about the other details. Pre-process functions. Can anybody find the difference between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8? Me neither. So those are exactly the same. Introducing Twig. We just saw a couple of quick examples of it, but kind of glossed over the details. This is the big difference between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. In Drupal 7, we had the PHP template engine, which basically just meant we included a PHP file and you could do anything in there you wanted to, which was incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous and led to all kinds of security havoc. I was just going over doing a security review on a project that defined, processed, and updated the database from forms entirely defined inside of template files. Twig doesn't make that stuff impossible, but means that you have to do real backflips. It's like hard to learn enough about the system to abuse it like that without learning the better way to do it and how much easier it is. So Twig gives us this syntax that behind the scenes will actually get compiled into PHP code to make it fast, but you never even have to worry about or see that. You just do this super simple thing. You want to add a comment, you can describe something just by putting curly brackets and hash marks on either side, whatever you want in the middle. You want to do something, like set a variable called foo to bar, you put these percents. I think without exception, anything in those percents can't print to the screen. So essentially, like this will import stuff, it'll set values, it'll define values, it'll add to existing variables, won't ever actually cause a thing to get printed right there. Possibly sort of one exception. Here, this is how you say something. This is how you actually print out foo. So if we set foo to bar, and then had this line on the next line, that would print bar into our template, right? But in addition to just printing things, you can also change the values on their way through. So this would capitalize the first letter of bar, printing out bar capitalized. For some more examples here, you can see we're calling setting hi there, then calling title piped. This is the syntax for sending it through to a filter. And you can chain these, so you can have multiple ones in a row. I don't want to make this slide any more confusing than it already is. Capitalize, you can see it was lower here, and now it's upper there. You can also dig inside of objects. So in a node template, if you've got a node variable, you can call node.createTime and pipe that straight to date, and here you'll see this filter actually takes input parameters. So this comes right out of Twig core, and you can see that that's formatting things to today's date, day, month, year. And then here, you can also see that Drupal also ships a series of filters that extend the ones that come with Twig out of the box, Twig the Symfony component. And so here, we're calling Drupal's defined long date format and handing in whatever's on the node.createTime, right? Now we're starting to get into the territory where, like, if you had done this in a PHP template before, you might have had a developer yell at you and say, put that in a PHP process function. We're already getting into stuff where, no, man, that's Twig code, be cool. It's fine. I can't hurt myself. I'm an adult, we're cool here. So, how do you print a variable safely? In Drupal 7, you might have done something like this. You'd open PHP tags and close PHP tags, and in between you call print, check plain, and then some variable you wanted to print, right? And if you didn't call the check plain, your site just got hacked. So don't forget the check plain, unless you know that the variable's actually already being checked, which a lot of the time they are. So like maybe dig back into the module that defined the function and like see what it did to prepare the data for you. And what do you mean you're not a PHP developer, you're a front-end person? You're going to need to go read Fuse core modules code and like figure out what that did, right? That was our answer before. Now our answer is, it's hard to screw it up, put a couple of curly brackets in the variable in between, and it's going to do the right thing and be safe, and you don't need to worry about whether someone escaped this for you or if you're responsible for doing it. But what if I want to print something dangerously? Well, in Drupal 7, that was the default. If you just weren't thinking for a minute, that's what it would do. Hack your site. Here, you have to pipe it to raw. I think we probably should have called that raw, dangerous, don't do this, what are you doing, stop. But it's raw instead. But don't do that. So those are the basics, right? I also probably could have put conditionals in there. They're sort of, if you've ever done conditionals in a template, they're pretty much the same. It's the % syntax and it's an if. And you can do and or. But there's more, right? That's all the stuff that you could have done before, and this is how you do it now. Here we're going to get into the real Twig magic. And that's some of the stuff that like either you couldn't do it before, or you could, but it was gross and a developer might yell at you. So first, include. What if I want to take one template and I want to just paste it into another? Well, I can do that. I can have a header that says, welcome everyone. I can have a footer that says, you're lovely. And in between, I can include header, put some HTML, and then include the footer, and that's going to print out, welcome everyone, you're lovely, I'm glad you could make it. But wait, there's more. You can do an advanced include. So here, we're making it a little more clever. Our header actually uses variables. So if we have a greeting set, it'll print the greeting. If we don't, we're piping it to default, which if no greeting is set, we'll set whatever we've handed in to default. So if we don't say anything, it'll say welcome, and then we're going to print the name. So here, we'll set greeting to hi, set the variables to set a new object called variables with the name of Alvin, and now when we call include header.html.twig with vars only, you'll see it says welcome Alvin. Now you might say, wait a minute, but you defined hi. Why doesn't it say hi Alvin? Why is it still using the default? Because of that word, because with vars only means that rather than the normal behavior of including the template and having all the variables in the parent follow into the child that you're including, with vars only allows you to define what you want to hand in so that you could have the same variable name with a different value in the template you're including than the one that you have in the parent. Or you can filter it, you can lie to it, you can exclude stuff. And whatever you have in the parent is irrelevant if you're handing in the specific vars object, which you can define inline if you're not trying to fit this on a slide.
Has nothing to do with set green instead of greeting.
Good eye, good eye. That also would break it, but no. Or you're right. Were I to remove with vars only, I'd be scratching my head saying, why isn't this working? And the answer would be because I have a typo. Now, what if we want to take one template and overwrite just certain pieces of it? Anyone that's done Drupal has probably had to do that before, right? And what's our answer in Drupal 7? Copy the template, whole hog, delete the little bits that you wanted to be different, and replace them. Or sometimes in template.php, take the work someone else did for you, throw it away, and make a bunch of database calls to redo it. There's less of that in Drupal 8 too. So it extends allows you to import one template and overwrite certain portions of it. So if I had, I've split this across a couple of pages because my example here is a little bit big. So if I had a base template that said we've got a block head, and then our block called head, I haven't talked about blocks yet, but this is a good time, I thought this would be a good time to just sort of slip it in. Blocks allow you to kind of create these named sections, and you'll see why in a second. This is exactly the allow you to cleanly replace something part. I've got a block called head, and then inside that I've got another block called title. And here you'll notice that this block doesn't even have anything inside it. It's just creating a little area for me to inject or overwrite the contents right there. And then you can see we append our site, so that's the way we can set our title in our HTML page here. And then you can see here in body content, again, we're just creating an empty block called content. So, cool. We've created this sort of boilerplate layout, base.html.twig. It's got a replaceable head block, a replaceable title, and a replaceable content there. So what we can do is say, again, remember comment describes something with the hashes for comments, percents to do something like extending or setting a variable, and then curly brackets for printing something, just to remind you about that syntax. So here I'm saying extend base.html, which means start by just assuming I want everything that we had in the other template. But for block title, I'd like to replace that with hello Drupalers. And with block head, I'm going to call the parent, which means go run whatever was in head, but keeping in mind I've already replaced title. So now this will say bring in head, call hello Drupalers, wrapping that with the title brackets there. I don't want to replace that, and I don't want to replace tacking on our site to the end of the HTML title. But I also, in the head, I want all that. I want to populate title. I want the wrapping stuff. I also want to append, including this JavaScript file. Now again, in Drupal, we do it with libraries or Drupal.js or something. This is just sort of showing you bare Twig, how does this thing work? And then in block content, we can define what would go in that content area. Hello, all of you. You look great. Should have said, excellent looking audience today. And so what would that give you? HTML, head, title, hello Drupalers, the other part coming from that other template. Tack this on to the bottom, because we call parent first, and then had the script thing. And then div content, and that gets populated with the stuff that we defined in that other block. Right, so just to review again, you've got this sort of boilerplate framework set up, and then that gets populated by these pieces that you overwrite. One gotcha here, when you're extending a base template, you're confined just to defining the stuff that you want to overwrite. You can't just like throw extra markup in around it, because you're saying take that template and let me override parts of it. Or set variables outside of it So you can set variables that sort of will then be updated when that template gets loaded.
So for the parent, you're basically saying get everything within the head tag and put it here, and then apply the line of the script.
Right. So what parent does, what you're basically doing is saying, when you say block head, you're saying I'm going to override the block head definition from before. Throw it all away, replace it with my stuff.
Yeah.
But what if you don't want to throw it all away? You just want to take what was there and add one tiny little thing.
Okay.
And the way you do that is you call parent wherever you want to pull in the stuff from the other thing.
So it's kind of like overriding after you copy and paste everything into it, in theory.
Exactly. So basically, like, I'm overriding it, but then, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm, imagine sort of in your Microsoft Word or whatever, it's like highlighting this and hitting cut, then saying I'm going to replace that, and then here you're saying paste, and then type this after it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's, again, what you'd sort of end up with. Now, an embed is like an include and an extend all at once. So with an embed, you can see here I've got an article with a title, it's a beautiful day, and a body saying the sun is shining. But what if I want to wrap that? Right? Remember that I said with an include, you're just pasting the other template into this template. And with an extend, I said you couldn't put markup anywhere other than something you were overwriting. So how do you take the other whole block and wrap it with something? Well, embed is what puts those two ideas together. So with embed, you can say, wrap the whole thing with section class equals articles plural, embed sample.html.twig, and then you can say block body, overwrite this part. Instead of saying the sun is shining, you say this is this beautiful day brought to you by the sun, trademark. And that will include the thing like an include, but then allow you to overwrite part of it like an extend. And that's how with an embed, you're able to wrap article with section, but then also populate body there. And then you can see here I'm calling parent and then tacking that line on the bottom. So that's pulling in the original body, and then I'm adding that to the bottom. So you can see I'm wrapping it, and then taking what was in the original one, and then adding a little thing to it. Use is a little weird. We don't use this one much at ZivTech. It allows you to include multiple templates. So the idea is like, what if I need to pull multiple reusable things in here? With a use, and use by default doesn't actually cause the thing to be printed, but it does pull it into scope so that you can call this block function, allowing you to print. You can see here I'm calling use blocks.html and rename sidebar to parent sidebar to make sure it, say, won't conflict with the sidebar I have here. So you can see in my base I have a thing called sidebar. Here I have a thing called sidebar. I'm extending base, so I already have a thing called sidebar, but I want to print the sidebar that I'm including, so I'm aliasing it to parent sidebar and printing it here, not unlike that call to parent, but to another imported template block. Yeah, if you're not 100% sure exactly where you'd use that, I'm not really either. But it's one of the primitives that's built in. I've seen it used a couple of times for like funny edge cases. So I thought I'd point it out just to make you familiar with it. If you see it, you'll kind of have a vague recollection of what it was supposed to do. And then you'll go read the Twig page on it and kind of feel more confused, and then you'll play with it and figure out what I did here, that's what it does. So that was all the like general Twiggy stuff, right? But that's not as that's sort of abstract and not totally applied to Drupal here. So let's start looking at what this means for Drupal developers who have been doing 7 work, moving into 8. All right. Well, first off, all of these changes have been making our templates break down into smaller pieces that are easier to understand and easier to extend. So first off, right off the bat, and that syntax is much nicer, right? Just printing a thing out safely instead of print PHP tag, print check plain and the variable, 2 curly brackets and the name of the variable, right? It's like half as many letters, way prettier. So here's D7 Bardix page.tpl.php. Here's D8 Bardix page.html.php. Except I couldn't fit it all on the screen, so that's really what the D7 one looked like in total and the D8 one in total, right? It's like a fraction as much code, does the same thing. In addition, in Drupal, we have this new thing called the attributes object, and that's partly what simplifies so much of this. We don't have as much conditionals to as many sprinkled around conditionals to print classes and things. There's this standard of most templates get 1 or more attributes objects, and that's like the attributes that you might have attached to a render array before. You can tack on any HTML attribute that would go into an individual element. So this is where your classes go, this is where your ID goes, this is where your crazy HTML5 properties go, ARIA stuff. You can tack most of that just right in there. And it has a bunch of helper methods like add class, which you can hand either an individual class or an array of classes. So you can throw at the top here, set classes to red and green, and then if you called attributes.addClass, it could do sort of both of those things. This means that you can do a lot of inline class manipulation, which you'll see all over the place, and paired with some of the primitives that come with Twig and what Drupal adds to it, you can do some powerful stuff. So here we're setting the classes. We're setting one for node --type the tilde is an append. Why Symfony didn't use the plus of JavaScript or the dot of PHP is a question for a fat pot, I guess. Content hash node, so that's grabbing that attribute from this render array. Dot bundle, so that would be like the node type. And then piping it to this clean class filter, which automatically escapes it for HTML, downcases it, replaces the spaces with dashes, making a nice CSS safe class name following the Drupal conventions. And then here, we see this ternary. So what that means is that if node.isPromoted is true, then we're adding node -- promoted. Otherwise, we don't. Otherwise, we do nothing. Same thing with sticky. One little line, and now you've got a node sticky in there. View mode. Ternary, so I think if this is set, if this part is set, you'll end up with view mode, node -- view, mode -- and then the view mode variable turned into a clean class. And then here you can see just calling attributes.addClass also returns the attributes object and prints that out. So you can kind of do that all in one step. So what can you do with that? This is the design for our new website that we're working on. And our designer came up with this crazy idea of kind of having these colors that would cycle through, and we don't want to have to go and remake people's colors every time we want to change the order to make sure the 2 purples don't end up next to each other. So our front-end people actually just did this right in the template. Didn't even ask a developer, how should I go about this? Didn't write a Sass macro that would generate 10,000 lines of CSS to cycle through however many, set the nth one for 1,000. How many could be on a page? I don't know, better generate a lot. So she used this crazy cycle tool that will automatically cycle through these elements as the individual items get printed. And so here she's setting the row of classes to this cycle 4. And as she prints row.attributes.add class row classes, this is automatically going team member blue, purple, teal, green, purple, blue, and back around. And so that was able to be done right inside this template, doing a little extend of our default view unformatted, tacking that on and adding these classes dynamically as that loop and rendering happens. Is this a little crazy and a little hard to follow at first blush? Yeah, a little, but it kind of illustrates how much, like the PHP code for this would have looked even grosser, I think. And it kind of illustrates how powerful this Twig syntax is and how many kind of out-of-the-box things you can do and move into the domain of the template. While you're at it, again, this is our pre-process. You can see here I'm just adding a variable called boom and setting it to kablooey. In Drupal 7, how would we now print that variable? Well, in Drupal 7, we'd take the entire template, we'd copy it out, like I was talking about, and up here we'd add print boom. And what do we need to do if we want to modify this template? Well, we need to go and make sure that we've copied it into any of the sort of child templates that follow the same pattern. If we've got a template for each node type, if we want to make a change to the pattern, we need to go update every single copy of it. In Drupal 8, we use that include I was talking about. So we have this original template in Drupal 8. That was the node.tpl from Bardic. And here we're just calling include right after whatever we wanted to add. So here I'm just adding strong tags, curly brackets boom to print out that variable called boom I created 2 slides ago, and then including at classy/content/node/html.twig. Now, I apologize for another low contrast slide. So at classy content node HTML, we haven't kind of looked at this before. What at sign do? It maps to the project and then the path inside the project. So this is classy templates folder. Inside the content directory, there's a node.html.twig file. And that's what we're referencing with that at sign, so that we can pull that in out of that parent project. I said Bardic, classy, sorry. So without classy, Drupal now doesn't print out all those classes that it sticks on every element. There was a big effort to say, like, stop being so opinionated about what classes we want. Drupal, chill out, by default give us nothing, and all those classes just got pulled out into this base theme called classy, which tacks all that stuff on, and then Bardic extends that to have all of its classes. So if you're kind of used to Drupal 7 theming, you probably want to build on top of classy. But you don't have to. And now if you want to get rid of all those classes, it's not a huge amount of work like it used to be. So I threw this back in here now so that it might be a little bit less confusing now that we've looked at. So I wanted one slide at the beginning talking about how you attach a library, and then I wanted another slide at the end now that we've looked at all the Twig stuff, so that we kind of talked about it in the context of this library change. And now that we've kind of seen all the syntax, we can talk about it in the context with a little more understanding. So again, curly bracket means say something, print something to the audience. Now, to the browser. Attached library is a little funny though, because it doesn't print it inline. It does register it in the attached and make sure that it ends up getting aggregated and all the rest. But it is a function call that does change the markup going out to the page, so it's curly brackets letting you know this is going to go sort of to the user. It's not a metadata thing where you're telling Twig what to do, right? You are telling it what to do, but you're not saying like I'm extending a thing or running an if or setting a variable. You're saying, yeah, add this to the response that you're going to send to the requester. And then again, this includes syntax. So here I'm attaching a library, so all of my nodes will end up having my node CSS file. It will only be on nodes. I don't need to even write a preprocess function for that bit. I could, don't have to. This is sort of the old way of doing it. If you weren't going to create an actual library from it, you could just call Drupal get path theme boom and add CSS node boom. Better would probably be to run the attached. I don't think I might have a slide of that. And then again, that includes syntax we just talked about. So the next question, I'm just about through my slides, and I think about it at a time, right? No, I guess we have a little more time. Twig debug settings. Again, like I said, Twig will magically create PHP files for you in the background, and it caches those, and Drupal by default does a bunch of render caching. So if you don't sort of put your site into debug mode, it can be really frustrating to have to do a cache rebuild. Cache clear in Drupal 8 has been renamed cache rebuild. It can be really annoying to have to do a cache rebuild on like every single change. So what you can do is in this new file in sites default next to settings, there's a new file called services.yaml, and you can set parameters, twig config, and you can sell it to not cache and debug is true. I'll show you what that does in a second. It's really helpful. And then you can define a service cache backend to send certain cache records to just never be cached, essentially. Which in settings.local.php, the new default settings PHP suggests that you can conditionally require a settings.local, so that you make sure that this stuff is sitting there and not creating a Git conflict and never going to be accidentally committed. And so you can, one thing you can do is add container YAMLs to a development snapshot for your local, which you can then version control without having any fear that it will get picked up on production. Extension discovery scan tests true, so that you look for new extensions all the time without having to do a cache rebuild, and then send the render and dynamic page cache to the null backend, which is going to make your local environment real slow, comparatively, but means that you're not going to have to run a cache rebuild all the time, which is even slower than just not caching that stuff. So sort of like when you're switching back into site building mode, maybe switch those back over if it's getting annoying. So what does that Twig debug thing do? Well, it's pretty stinking awesome, actually. It prints all of the Drupal template suggestions that could be used to replace a particular registered theme thing, and then tells you the beginning and ending output of the template actually being picked up. So how many of you have ever been trying to figure out why the markup just wasn't changing as you were editing your template to realize, as I did with that variable earlier, you fat-fingered something and it wasn't being picked up because you were trying to edit the NZO template instead of the node template, right? This can be a helper because then you can look right here and see like exactly what the original template was if you want to copy it and extend it. Right, all you need to do is use that @ thing to extend that template, or if you want to go grab its contents and copy it in, you can do that too if you want to make big changes to it. And you're also informed by all the things you could name your template. So HTML.html to just completely override that and always replace it. HTML admin to replace it only in the admin section, I believe. In the structure section, admin structure block. So just that page, replace just that thing. Or only on the block demo. So right on this, I was actually doing that block demo thing to show all the blocks, or just to demo this specific theme. If you wanted to drive your coworkers crazy, do that. So that every time they try to preview what the block should look like on this theme, it does something completely different. I think that'd be hilarious. As long as it wasn't done to me. So that is some of the highlights of sort of the Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 implementation differences. and how you would kind of do your conversion. And just to kind of have the rubber meet the road here, I do have these uploaded to GitHub. So essentially there are examples of how to do this stuff in 8 and 7. So you can go in here and see sort of what would I do in 7 to print out that, boom, I changed the examples. Oh, sorry, I'm not doing mirroring. So you can see here there are some examples of kind of how you would print different spans, different classes, different elements that you're getting in here, and how you'd override that, as opposed to, of course, this path isn't going to exist in 8 because things are moved. One second. Right, so again, that example of how we can attach our CSS file, which just changes the color of some stuff, printing that thing, and then including that parent template, causing us to see our kablooey variable styled blue as it is in that template, followed by the normal node stuff here of our test content, which is, as you can see, excellent. I think this is the first time I've ever actually finished a presentation with time to ask for like official questions instead of just talking like a used car salesman coming to the end of my pitch as the bell tolled. Questions on the Drupal 7, Drupal 8 conversion?
I have one not sure it's silly one. So you said that when we needed to use another template, we can just include now instead like a copy paste and make the changes. But when you included whether that new template has the original template you borrow from, also has your customized changes, whether the file size will become bigger.
Whether the file size would become bigger.
Because now your new template has your original one you get and also your changes.
Okay, so I think the question for the recording was if you were just going around grabbing what was created for you or was provided to you by Drupal core, and then you're extending it or importing it and then adding stuff to it, isn't it going to end up making what you send down to the client bigger?
Yeah.
Well, remember the different primitives that you have. So, so in our example, here, let me just go back to my slides for this. In our example, what did our Drupal 7 template look like? Well, we had all the lines we had before, and then we added this print for the boom variable. What does our thing look like in Drupal 8? Well, we add that line for boom, and then we pull in all the stuff that was already there. So in both cases, the thing we send down to the client is one line longer than the original template we were extending. Is that one line bigger in file size? Sure, but we were trying to add a thing, so of course it is. And remember that when you do an extend, you can overwrite one of the individual blocks. So there, you're throwing away what was in that original block, unless you call parent to print what was in the original block. And so if what was in the original block is bigger than what you're overwriting it with, then your file size ends up being smaller. And keep in mind, you can whole hog copy a whole template and then just edit it, right? Like that's still a thing you're going to end up doing a fair bit. Like if you want to just totally overwrite the HTML that's coming out and you don't want any of this stuff from before, you don't want to just wrap it, you don't want to just set some classes on it, you don't want to just change its ID, or in the case of fields, you can even change what HTML element it's generating just by setting the attribute for what the element variable. So, but if you're not just trying to switch it from a div to a date, right? You can copy the whole field template and then just edit it.
So this example, this is the question I was going to ask. This example, you're embedding the boom variable, right? So two parts to this question. One is that, how do you handle a conditional, like when boom is not there? And I guess the real question is, do you really go back? What's the best practice? Do you go back to the original node HTML Twig file and edit that and put the boom where you really want it? Real life case, you're not going to put it on the top. You're going to probably stick it somewhere midway through the page.
I mean, it depends. Like if you've overridden the node template and you're trying to extend your own template,
Right. So
you could add a block to your own template and then extend in that section.
So you
So,
use
like-
block rather than the other way around.
Yeah, right. So like what you essentially could do is in your node template, oh wait, this is Drupal 7. In Drupal 7, you're up a creek without a paddle. In Drupal 8,
There is no seven. There's only 8.
oh man, I don't want to like switch to mirroring because I'm totally going to screw up the monitor screen share. Uno momento, por favor.
Switch in the dark view.
Yeah, I will. Dark. And then I'll also crank up the, yeah, that's better for sure, right? Okay, so if you conditionally want to do it, you can totally do a conditional with like, sorry, so it'd be like percents. You can totally just do a conditional for if boom, and then an endif. Yep. So so that's one answer. But then if we did want to like have stuff sometimes at the top and sometimes at the bottom or whatever, you know, we could add block above and block, and we could have like block below. And then if I duplicated this and made node dash dash story, node dash dash story could overwrite node.html.twig. Sorry, by overwrite I mean extend specifically.
Yeah.
And then you could use that block syntax to replace what was in above or replace what was in below or clear stuff out or however you wanted to change it. So like really you can do anything you could have done in PHP, anything that we would have recommended you could do in PHP, in Twig, plus like a whole bunch of other stuff pretty cleanly and straightforwardly. A lot of the time, frankly, for this sort of stuff, I mean, it's like a purpose-built DSL. So a lot of the time it ends up, I think, being a little bit more readable in Twig than its corresponding PHP had been. So like in Twig, we also have a translate filter, which I pulled out because I thought I'd be short on time, but I guess there wasn't. So if you wanted to translate something, you can actually do something like hello class and pipe that right to the T filter, which is going to surface that as a translatable string in Drupal, and you can do string overrides and stuff, and that can take parameters and do like replacements and yeah. So obviously there are Drupal extensions here. Another thing worth noting, there are filters for if you have array keys. So like if you were printing a form variable, you can do the same stuff that you used to be able to do with hide on individual elements. You're going to be able to say like hide title up here, and then you do like print render form, and then separately print render form title to push the title down into some other markup down at the bottom. Now you can do, I think the syntax is just like that. So that oh, that was the other thing that I was going to talk about if I had time. Drupal 7 started this idea of return render arrays, not strings, and a lot of themers kind of never totally learned what a render array was, other than it was kind of scary and they hated it. But the idea was that like you could push stuff like this up to the front, and like with relatively, you don't need to know too much P to make sense of it. You could do some clever things to hide some piece and print it out later. In practice, I think what happened is that people got scared off or broke something and then became afraid to test it, and then called the developer over to their workstation every time they wanted to touch that kind of stuff. At least that's what the impression I have from being tapped on the shoulder a lot. But I think the idea is that like with a lot of these additional primitives, and with this stuff having kind of magic rendering, the render kind of happens transparently for you most of the time, and then you have these like primitives to deal with it a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more cleanly. And this can also be piped to other filters. So you could then send this to some other, what's that?
Capitalized, lowercase.
Yeah, right.
What's the corresponding only instead of without? Like anyone without somewhere else?
Yeah, I believe it's only. There's also, I think, without field. So if you're rendering an entity, it's a little smarter rather than trying to dig around in the render array of the entity to figure out what to hide. So there's a few like little Drupal additions, kind of like that date format one, as opposed to Twig's native date, where Twig's native date wants a timestamp or a PHP datetime object or whatever, whereas Drupal's, and then it just pipes it to the PHP date function. Whereas in Drupal, we have this idea of like configurable date formats, and it can be a short one or a long one or a medium one, and now we can reuse those in Twig. There's, I know we need to wrap here. There's also, I think it's just dump, and there's also like and then I think you can pipe that to keys. There's a great there's some great content in the Drupal handbook. I highly recommend the Drupal handbook on this stuff. And now I'm getting to talk really fast at the end of my session. There's also a great project called Twig Tweak. And Twig Tweak comes with a whole bunch of extra things like Drupal entity to print, like to route a node through a particular like display mode, and Drupal field where you can say grab the first value, and sending things. Oh, this one's really nice. Sending things through the image style presets, and doing token replacements. So this is a nice thing that gives you like a whole bunch of extra filters. And of course, if a contrib module can define new filters, so can you. And you can define new filters. You can actually even define new tags like extend if you really want to write a bunch of crazy PHP OO code, or bug one of your friends who likes to do that sort of thing to do it. You can, the sky's the limit. Like all things in Drupal, you can extend everything, and Drupal 8's magic. All right, I'll be around if anybody has questions.
Thanks, Edward.
Thanks a lot.